What should be the basis for recognizing plurality? I think it is unavoidable that in the West, plurality should be recognized from the basis of the Judeo-Christian tradition, which has formed nearly everything that the West holds dear. Its institutions, its laws, its customs, its values. Well, we've heard all about that. And if secularism is taken to mean tabula rasa, of the tabula rasa of Locke perhaps, then that is not an option. Otherwise, we are into this situation of infiltration by an ideology for which we have no response. The point about democracy has been made. Democracy is not just about elections. It is about subscription to certain fundamental values, the rule of law, fundamental freedoms, and also a commitment to democracy beyond attaining power through the ballot box. The relationship of religion to law has just now been discussed. The point is that whilst individuals can of course be highly moral without any religious belief, as the surveys show, in fact the great moral codes have all been articulated within religious systems, whether people like that or not. And the question is, what should be the relationship of these moral codes to lawmaking today? And there are two things to say. First, that there must be a relationship. You can remove the 10 commandments from courts of justice, but you can't do away with the fact that our whole moral sense has been formed by them. But secondly, that this is not a direct relationship. Not everything that is in the moral codes is about lawmaking today. So we need to distinguish between those. On this question, we have the matter of the Sharia. Now, in Muslim countries, the Sharia relates differently to different constitutions and processes of lawmaking. So in some countries, as in North Africa, it is merely the inspiration for lawmaking. In others, like Pakistan, no law can be promulgated if it is shown to be contrary to Sharia. In some countries, of course, like Saudi Arabia and post-revolutionary Iran, Sharia or fiqh, to be more precise, in one form or another, is the law. My own view about Sharia in Britain and generally in the West is that it would be very difficult, indeed problematic, for Sharia to be given any public role in law in Western societies. This is because Sharia directly contradicts many of the assumptions of Western society. For instance, even Muslim lawyers will tell you that many of the provisions of Sharia are built on inequality between Muslims and non-Muslims, between women and men, and so forth. In family law, polygamy, rules for divorce, custody of children, laws of inheritance, etc., would all make any recognition in law of Sharia problematic in any Western dispensation. So what can happen? What can we say to those who want to bring Sharia to Western societies? Well, of course, we can say no, but we can also say that it is important for governments and for legislatures in the West to recognize religious conscience. This was the issue that the Archbishop of Canterbury was addressing, and which notoriously Parliament in Britain has neglected in the last 2 or 3 years. The recognition of religious conscience is not to recognize any religious law in legal terms, but it is to recognize that religious people are governed in a way that other people are not, and to make some provision in law for that. Religious leaders of any community will, of course, form that community in terms of the religious dictates of that community. That is to be understood. And they will also bring their influence to bear on public policy in terms of what they believe. That also is obvious. But this is quite different from a public recognition of Sharia or indeed of any other religious law. I am so glad that the clarification was made about what was said about the Beth Din, the Jewish religious courts in Britain. On Sharia and Islamic finance, because this is a question that has been raised, Robin Lee Pemberton, when he was the governor of the Bank of England, said that the main thing to grasp about Islamic finance is that it is not banking. Your principal is never secure because all Islamic financial arrangements are a form of investment. So you can lose your principal as well as any profit that you may make if the venture in which it is invested is loss-making. The second thing about Islamic finance is that it changes money-based transactions to asset-based transactions. So the problem with sukuk in the interchange between Norman and Melanie, the problem with sukuk is that it will give Islamic individuals, companies, organizations a stake in perhaps strategic Western assets, because that is the only way you can do it. I understand now that there is a question being raised as to whether insurance is Islamic or not. And if it is found to be un-Islamic, then takaful, a particular kind of Islamic insurance, is being promoted, which again is asset-based, and it is not simply insuring your life against a payment of money. Now, we can discuss that later if you wish. So the situation is very complex. Reciprocity, I just want to mention. One Christian theologian, Roman Catholic, Jesuit, has said recently, all we need is unconditional generous love. Well, I admire his sentiment, but I'm afraid I can't emulate it because of the danger. Others speak of reciprocity as tit for tat. You know, if we have mosques in London, why don't we have churches in Riyadh or Jeddah or even Mecca or Medina? Well, that's a fair question. I think what I would like to mean by reciprocity is neither of these things. It is really a common commitment to fundamental freedoms wherever we have influence. And the word dialogue I have not mentioned at all in my talk this afternoon, but if I had, I would say this is one of the principal features of interreligious dialogue today, is a common recognition of fundamental freedoms. Now, if I had time, I would have gone on to talk about conflict and how that can be justified, and what resources there might be in the different faiths for thinking about the justification of unconventional conflict in our world today, but I don't have time. My chairman has already been very patient indeed, and so have you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Bishop Michael. I'm sure all of us appreciate what up till now in our program has been missing and you have so well supplied, and that is a brief but learned overview of what has brought us to our present circumstance. Manny, let me ask you, how much time do we have in this session now? Or whoever's in charge. You always look like you're in charge. I assume you are. About 10 minutes. So we just got a little time for questions. Right behind you, yes, the gentleman in the handsome beard.
Is this working? Oh. Sebastian Gorka, Educational Initiative for Central and Eastern Europe and the Hudson Institute. That was an incredibly forceful history lecture, especially extemporaneously. But I'd like to go to your conclusion. You had one conclusion there, which is all we need is a common recognition and commitment to fundamental freedoms where we have influence. And as a man of the cloth, we recognize why you would say that. Could you give us some clues or tips as to what we do in those areas where we don't have influence?
Yes, I mean, I was speaking particularly about reciprocity, that when that word is mentioned in the context of Muslim-Christian dialogue particularly, but not only, What we need to recognize is that this must be an item on the agenda. I am engaged in a regular annual dialogue with Al-Azhar Sharif, the premier Sunni theological institution based in Cairo, and each year we are allowed to raise one subject each. I mean, Al-Azhar raises one point for the dialogue and we do another. So we are limited to 2 points. And in every case, the point that is raised on either side has to do with some aspect of fundamental freedom or what limitation there might be on it. So 2 years ago, we raised the question about apostasy because it was current. Abdul Rahman in Afghanistan had been sentenced to death. And 2 years ago, you remember the Danish cartoons controversy also arose. Both issues were about freedom.